Okay, maybe we can start. Welcome to this webinar about the patient's role in medicine development. I understand it's a very interesting topic that is getting importance almost day by day. Indeed, not later than 4 or 5 years ago, the role of patients was really not raising interest, but a significant pressure by patient association, by organizations that are stressing the role of patients, really have raised interest in this new frontier in medicine development. I'm very pleased that we have today two excellent speakers, very familiar with this topic. They played an important role in patient involvement. We have Dr. Rosalind Schneider. She is a physician, graduated at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. She then practiced internal medicine with a special interest in lung diseases. And in fact, she is chair of the board of the American Lung Association. She then moved to the industry, but maintaining her role, her interest in connecting the pharmaceutical organization with the patient association. The second speaker is Dr. Ingrid Klingman. Also, Ingrid is a physician with a specialization in general medicine, clinical pharmacology, and pharmaceutical medicine. She has extensive experience in pharmaceutical companies, in CRO, but also in the hospital clinical trials office. She is chairman of the European Forum of Good Clinical Practice and also president of the PharmaTrain Federation. Maybe she spent a few words about this. PharmaTrain has created a community of master courses all over the globe, sharing a syllabus that is a syllabus that recently was updated with version 3, and all masters that really want to achieve a very high visibility should adopt the syllabus that has a really significant impact in the education of professionals in medicine development. So today we will test a new system. Instead of having formal presentation, we will have the two speakers interacting. So we hope that this will be more interesting and more engaging from your point of view. So the first one will be Ingrid, if I remember correctly. No, Ingrid will share the slide and Rosalind will start. So Rosalind, the microphone is for you. And thank you again for your collaboration.
Thank you, Domenico, and thank you, Ingrid. First, just to say we're thrilled to be here with you, and the comments that we're making today on this presentation are our own and do not necessarily represent the views of our employers or any organization with whom we're affiliated currently or previously.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also from my side, I'm delighted to join this hour with you. And while Rose and I will speak and explain the situations that are similar or different in US and Europe to stimulate your thinking and your involvement, we would be delighted if you would put your questions in the chat or in the discussion afterwards. Also unmute yourself and join our discussions because we are both super fans of patient involvement. We are both absolutely convinced that this is not only necessary, but the best thing that could happen to our discipline. And we would like to bring that over, this enthusiasm, to you. So I'll share the slides and Rose, you will start.
Perfect. So let's start with the basic premise that we believe that patient engagement is essential for better medicine. And when we say better medicine, it's not only the medicines that are being developed, but also the broader scope of medical practice, medical services, and all medical products are better when we have patient engagement or involvement throughout that whole system. And people who are living with their conditions are the patients, the families, the care partners. These are the most critical stakeholders in healthcare. They are the experts on what it's like to live with their medical conditions. And on top of being lived experience experts, many patients are also technical experts, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what we know to be true is that medical products and services will have greater impact for the patient community, for academic researchers, for medicine developers, for all stakeholders, if those medical products and services address what people need, what people want, and if those products and services fit into the lives of the people who are living with these various conditions. And that is because we would then be looking at the outcomes that matter most to people. We have then clinical trials that become more feasible for people to participate in and for people to stay with. Our clinical research programs then are more efficient and potentially faster to get from an idea all the way out to a medicine to patients. And the involvement of patients all along the way creates that mutual trust that we build upon with that iterative dialogue, not in a transactional way, but to say we have a relationship with the patient communities. And then along the time scale, we'll have times where we do projects and things together, and that may be, we'll say, more transactional, but it's built on the basis of a relationship. And, you know, as Domenico said, some of this is new, some of it is not so new. And the nothing about us without us mantra is one that I heard most loudly when I was in clinical practice, you know, 1980s, 1990s, even, of the people living with HIV infection who were chanting nothing about us without us. And their activism combined with the science, combined with advocacy, is what I credit with getting us to where we are today, where living with HIV infection is very different than it was when I was in practice. And again, it's that collaboration between patients and researchers and regulators and all of the parts of the healthcare system. But the mantra is not actually new. It comes from a statement from the 16th century Poland. So I think what we do is we continue to evolve what that means for the patient community today. And we should level set on who we're talking about when we say patients. And Ingrid is going to talk much more about EUPATI, the European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation. But a paper that came out of that project is this one that talks about individual patients. There we're talking about the person who's living with the diagnosis. They may or may not have technical knowledge related to R&D or regulation, but their main role is to contribute that subjective personal disease experience and their treatment experience. Carers, and in the United States, sometimes you'll hear the term caregivers or care partners. These are the people who are supporting the individual patients. They may be family members, they may be volunteer helpers, they may be paid helpers, but they have an important role to play as well in understanding what that experience is like for patients. Patient advocates are people who have the insight and experience of supporting a larger community of patients, people living with a specific condition. And being an advocate doesn't necessarily mean that you are affiliated with an advocacy organization. So that's an important distinction. They may or may not be affiliated with an organization. And where patient organization representatives, if they're wearing that hat, they are mandated then to represent and express those collective ideas and views from the patient organization on a specific issue or in the specific disease area. And then finally, patient experts have that disease-specific expertise, but they have the additional technical knowledge of research and development or regulatory processes through very specific and I'll say intense training that they get through a program, for example, like UPATI fellows received during that. I show this patient experience or journey map that came out of a working group I was a part of with National Health Council that's in the United States, because we talk a lot about what the patient's journey is. And we have to think about it very holistically. And there's a push now for that to be done in a more systematic way with standardized outputs. So National Health Council convened multiple stakeholders to develop this, and you can find it on their website. But the idea is that people who have a condition for a long time before they're ever diagnosed might be living with that condition and trying to figure out what's going on while they're also living their lives in that first island. And then in the middle island, they, through the twists and turns, get to a diagnosis, again, as they're also living their lives at the same time and have their personal goals at the same time. And then finally in the third island, where there already is a diagnosis for that person, for that family, working through if there are treatments available, working through if they want to participate potentially in clinical trial as a care option, trying to get to those desired outcomes and their life aspirations, not only their disease goals. And then thinking about this again more holistically, that there are multiple life factors that influence their outcomes, but that influence what they choose to do along this experience map. And those may include their finances, their school, their work, their mental health, their insurance, the family support system. So this is an attempt to say, let's think about this experience holistically and how we might bring that experience into the medicines and services that we're developing together with patients. Another framing that may be helpful for us, I certainly find it helpful myself, is terminology that was coined by an advocate, Suze Schrant, and that is to divide patient engagement, our thinking about patient engagement, into type A or individual engagement and type B or systematic patient engagement. And they influence each other and they're both very important. The type A or individual is engagement within one's own healthcare, within one's own participation in research. We know that patient activation in that way improves outcomes. But that's different than what we're talking about when we're asking people to participate and to be engaged in this type B or system-wide kinds of participation. And that is working side by side with patients, academics, with the sponsors in the planning, in the conduct and dissemination of clinical trials, or in developing policies, or in making hospital systems or healthcare systems better. So this framing, again, anything we do on the right side influences what we see on the left side and vice versa.
Okay, so what we need also to be aware of is that patient advocacy, in fact, occurs on very different levels, in very different areas. There is the typical patient support where patient advocates help other patients living with their disease with information, with support, help them to navigate through their diagnosis and therapy opportunities. That is what the vast majority, at least in Europe, of patient organizations is doing. And by the way, in Europe, we have thousands and thousands of patient organizations. Of course, also because we have all these countries, and in every country you have this, for the same indication, you have a patient organization. But the last time this was counted, we were at over 40,000 patient organizations in Europe. And the vast majority is really on that level. But there are also patient advocates who are active on the health policy level. They try to influence health policy and patient care on the political level in their national political environment, on a European level. And we have the rapidly growing involvement for patient advocates in research and education, where they contribute in partnership with clinicians in different networks, industry regulators, ethics committees, and HTA bodies, and where the European strategy started to focus on in the last 10 plus years. And when talking about that area of involvement in all the medicine's development process, what the community has come up with is that the impact on the involvement is the bigger, the earlier the involvement of patients starts. But in reality, involvement of patients mostly happens towards the end of the development process, or on the level of a clinical trial that has already been decided on the design, and it is more about the informed consent process, or perhaps conditions during a clinical trial. And more now also on the result reporting. So you are probably all familiar with this level of, with this process of the medicine's development process, but we need to figure out what we can do to make the impact of patient involvement as relevant as possible. There are different layers nowadays on which patient involvement can happen, from let's say, giving this the story of their experience to active participating in different steps of the drug development process. But what we do not have yet is a clear understanding in how far this is, or where this will develop towards, whether we will even come at some stage to shared leadership. Is that desired? That is something that is much discussed at the moment, but there is definitely an element of co-creation already starting during different phases of the entire life cycle. And this is another, this is the core slide, I would say, from EUPATI that I mentioned before. I will come back to you afterwards on that. What you see here is the medicine's development process as we have defined that in PharmaTrain, and where we developed the syllabus that covers all the different items that need to be taught when the drug is developed. And this was taken also as the basis for the education that EUPATI is trying to or is conveying to lay people, so to say, to the patient advocates who are interested in supporting this. And these are all the areas where patient involvement can happen, has happened, and is currently happening. So from the setting prior research priorities, protocol synopsis and design, steering committees, information to participants, investigator meetings, on the data side, regulatory affairs, etc. So over to you, Ross.
Thank you. Yes, and for all of those key points in medicine development where patient involvement is having an impact and can and does add value, it won't just happen by itself. It must happen by design, strategically, in the way that we plan the other work that we do within developing medicines. And the core principles in that human-centered design that, again, is deliberate, is in generating and fostering an organizational culture that embraces the idea and the practice of involving patients as experts. What needs to also happen is that we have buy-in at every level of organizations, from the grassroots level to the executives, because not only won't this just happen, but it also is not for free. So it takes time, it takes people, it takes finances, and it takes planning to be able to allocate the appropriate resources in a stage appropriate way from that earliest time through maturity in that roadmap of developing medicines that was in the previous slide. So we must build that in rather than something that we add on if there are resources left at the end of a quarter or something like that. It has to be built in and integrated into the other plans that we have. For example, into our clinical development plans, into our brand plans once there is a marketed medicine, and continue that integration of patient engagement and resource allocation as appropriate for that particular stage. And then we need to have formal policies and procedures. If we go back to the previous one, that's okay. So policies and procedures are needed to take that passion that exists within the culture of the organization and convert that into operational practice, because we have to make sure that we not only are doing the right things, but that we're doing it in the right way and respecting that there are differences in how we might be able to engage patients in the various countries that we have medicines, that we develop medicines. And then we absolutely need to have stakeholder relevant metrics, because we need to continuously improve, and we also need to reaffirm that organizational culture. The way that happens is you show people that the work that they're doing, that they're accountable for in the organization, is improving because of patient engagement. And they need some metrics to show them that year over year. And then the next is you.
Yeah, okay. So when you hear around, everybody is talking now about patient involvement, patient engagement, and how important that is. However, in reality, there are still big gaps. Although a lot of things are happening at the moment that are changing that, but still, obviously, there are hurdles for industry, for academia, but also for competent authorities, ethics committees, HTA bodies. They all say, yes, in principle, we should, more or less, or perhaps. But why is it then not happening? And one of the important experiences is that a lot of pharma companies have nowadays a patient engagement group. Academic centers, so more rarely, but hardly any of the companies have really installed patient involvement as a routine element of their clinical development processes. So in the clinical research departments, because the clinical research colleagues, there is still a lot of fear about delays by bringing in patients, additional costs, conflicts of interest. There are many arguments why it is not the right moment or not really relevant here, or too early or too late to involve patients in their current status of the work. But there's another aspect, and this is that even if there is a wish to involve patients, all these stakeholders, companies, academic centers, authorities, etc., have problems to find patients with a sufficient knowledge to make meaningful contributions. There are a lot of, or there have been a lot of situations where patients were involved as alibi patients because it was not felt relevant what these patients were able to contribute, because they did not and do not understand in many cases why drug development is so complex. What are the processes? What are the limitations? What are the compromises that have to be done by the research team? And therefore, it requires an understanding of the advising patients of the problems that the drug developers have in their methodology and in their processes. Now, what usually helps is a political will, so legislation that requires that, and that is currently not the case. We have in Europe now the clinical trials regulation, There you find hints about patient involvement and patient voices, but it is not a request in this clinical trial regulation to involve patients into the process. We have here to consider that this law was written in 2011, 2012, and finally released then in 2016. So that is 10 years old, in fact, this text. And therefore, at that time, patient involvement was really not such a burning issue, but it means we do not have that here. Now, on the guideline side, when you look at ICH and other guidelines, there the request for patient involvement gets massive. That is in ICH E8, where it's clearly said patient involvement needs to be done. That is on the next slide, but also in the upcoming ICH GCP guideline, the third revision, we will have a very clear request for patient involvement. So it is coming, but so far on the guideline level. So in ICH, in the E8, about where it says about general principles, it says, if there is a paragraph on patient input into drug development, and there it's clearly said that the views of patients or their caregivers can be valuable throughout all phases of drug development, and involving patients early in the design of a study is likely to increase trust in the study, facilitate recruitment, and promote adherence, etc. So here we have clearly the request to involve patients and a statement agreed on a global basis, because ICH is global, that patient involvement makes sense. You want to continue on that one?
Just one moment, if you like. We have a question, so I think it's better to give immediate answer. This is the advantage of having a live webinar. I will read exactly the question, and then maybe both Ingrid and Rosalind can answer. How are we measuring the impact of patient engagement across the asset life cycle, both at individual company level, but also across the industry as a whole? So, can you offer some insight to this issue?
Well, we come to this later. Can we delay a bit or postpone the answer to that? Perhaps in Rose's presentation here on that topic, the answers may be given. If not, we can come back to that question. Would that be okay?
Yes, of course.
Good. Okay. Now, what are the hurdles for patients? I just talked about the hurdles for the other stakeholders that engage patients, but what are the hurdles for patients? And there we have quite hard data that show that the topic from a large European survey that was performed at the very beginning of UPATI, that the topic, how are new medicines developed, is really of no interest to the public at large, as long as people or their relatives or friends are not sick. To some degree, Corona has changed that. During Corona, we saw a massive increase in interest in how new medicines, how new vaccines are developed. People have started to even talk about clinical trials, waiting for results. So that has really changed to some degree. But overall, when you ask the population, there is very little knowledge. That is not a topic that people are really usually discussing. Especially, there is hardly any knowledge about the medicines development process in the public at large. Also, that has to some degree changed during Corona, but is still very, very limited. And especially, there is hardly any knowledge, really any knowledge in the public and also the patient population about the relevance of and the options for patient engagement in the patient community, in the physicians community, and the public at large. In addition, we have to keep in mind that there is still a negative image of clinical research. Also, that has to some degree changed during Corona, but we have also seen the opposite, that it increased even the mistrust, that the mistrust increased during the Corona period. So we still have, it's not something where people who say, I'm participating in the trial, get admired for. Mostly the reaction is, are you mad? So the image is not really good, and we have still to work on that. And there is also, in all fairness, still very few well-structured, reliable, objective, neutral, and well-understandable information and education opportunities available to patients who have any interest in changing that situation. Okay, Ross, back to you.
Thanks. And Domenico had asked us also to touch specifically, specifically on patient involvement in rare and orphan conditions. And I think it's important for us to remember that while each condition is quite rare, collectively, more than 300 million people are living with rare conditions across the world. And we have the definitions of rare from World Health Organization in the EU and in the United States here on the slide. The number that's quoted most often as far as the number of identified rare conditions is that it's more than 7,000. I just came back from a Global Genes conference where everybody was talking about the more than 10,000 rare conditions that have been recognized. Some of them are ultra rare and don't even have a name. And those challenges that we talk about in living with any condition are only magnified in living with rare conditions. And on that first island that I showed in the patient experience of living with a condition before you even know what it is, that can be longer and it can be quite a diagnostic odyssey to get to an appropriate and accurate diagnosis. Even when we have a marker, even when we have a newborn screening test, that doesn't necessarily get done universally from country to country, and even in the United States from state to state. States get to decide what is on their panel of newborn screening in that state. We also see the challenges of limited access to those specialty centers where you have people who have seen these conditions and to clinical trial sites. We have evidence of inadequate accommodations for the people who are living with these conditions that affect their education, their employment, and their quality of life. And that also affects how and when they interact with the healthcare system. And for many of these rare conditions, there are no approved treatments. And even within these small numbers of people who have a particular condition, there are wide differences in their manifestations. So that makes it more difficult to interpret the data in clinical research that you can't make up for by increasing your sample size because of the limited number of people who are living with those conditions. At the same time that you have these challenges, you have opportunities for participation in clinical research as a care option for people living with rare conditions. And it's all the more important to have involvement from the patient community about what's most important to them and how it would be feasible for them to participate in those clinical trials and to remain in the clinical trials so that we get the quality information at the end that will then serve the whole community. And the next.
Okay, now this lack of knowledge and this lack of a capacity of patients who have experience with the disease but understand the needs and the methodology of the medicines developers was something that that in Europe became really very important and very visible as one of the biggest hurdles to make patient involvement meaningful and effective. And we have and had here in Europe the Innovative Medicines Initiative starting in 2009, which is nowadays called HI. Because it is now larger and includes also medical devices. But this public-private partnership between the European Commission and the pharmaceutical industry enabled many different projects that were and are supposed to improve infrastructure. And very early in the process, when PharmaTrain, that was the very first project that was funded and started, And from that experience on what it takes and how much it helps to have a comprehensive understanding of the medicine's development process of the experts, the idea came up that, of course, in a lay version and in the reduced version, and not from a producer but from a reviewer perspective, it would make sense to educate patients, interested patients, and patient representatives, advocates, about how the medicine's development process works, and in this way increase the relevance of the input that these educated patients can give. So that was then ultimately an IMI project, which got the name European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, ultimately with the aim to achieve a shift in empowering patients on medicines R&D because of their increased knowledge. So the idea was to create a cohort of educated patients that would go through a similar diploma course like it was proposed for experts in pharmaceutical medicine in PharmaTrain, but of course from a patient perspective. And in this way, really make sure that the understanding of the full process is there, but that this information should really be in lay language, easily understandable, and not only available in English, but in as many languages as possible, definitely in the mostly spoken languages in Europe. Because of many of these languages are global languages, also reaching out on a global basis. In this way, a snowball principle was created with these core of diploma type educated patients, later called UPATI fellows, who would then help to educate other patients and provide material and learning opportunities for patients with the different diseases in their different countries. This IMI project promised, so to say, as funding reason, that 100,000 people would use the material that was created by UPATI, that the project was finished, and I show you the effect. Nowadays, UPATI still exists. It is a foundation now, a not-for-profit organization, therefore based in Holland, and is continuing the work that has been started under the IMI funding. So the course that was created is running now. It's the 6th cohort that is currently running. It's a 14-month course. There are many countries represented. 196 were when we counted last, in 197 diseases. So not only Europe, but there are now also patient representatives, people coming from, in fact, all over the world. And since 2021, this offer was enlarged by not only allowing patients to a course with a limited number, but everybody can have access to this course in the so-called UPATI Open Classroom. These are individual modules on introduction to R&D, non-clinical development, clinical development, regulatory affairs, HTA, and medical devices. It's very cheap. It's a very little fee to go through those course modules. And those who want to do the full course can then apply for getting also into the 2 face-to-face modules that are part of that course. And then at successful completion of the course are then becoming a UPATI fellow. In fact, the material is not only these course modules, but a lot of material, over 3,500 content items, all created under Creative Commons license, which means everyone can use that completely freely. There are infographics, there are articles, there are presentations. All that material is available now in 14 languages, and you see them all here. And in fact, we have now more than 6.9 million users. So that was in July 23. Now we are over 7 million users from more than 200 countries who are using that material, who are downloading that, who are working on that, and who benefit from having this source. So we have currently more than 1,200 open classroom learners. We have more than 330 patient UPATI fellows. And also we have in Italy, Holland, and some other countries starting national courses that are following that path and are giving the course in their national language. But in the meantime, and that was from the beginning a very important aspect, it's not only the patients who need to learn about the medicine's development process, but it's also the academic and industry sponsors who need to understand and learn how to best integrate patients into the development process. So there are also now over 1,100 trained professionals from industry and academia who have systematically learned about patient involvement. UPATI organized, installed so-called UPATI national platforms as the springboard, so to say, for national training opportunities. And as I mentioned, we have now the first UPATI fellows from the US, Canada, India, Japan, Korea, Singapore, South Africa, and more are currently from other countries around the world participating in the current course. But UPATI has not only created this course material or this content, but also guidelines, guidance on, in very practical terms, on how patient involvement can be made more efficient when they collaborate with industry, within ethics committees, in HTA bodies, or in regulatory authorities. And last but not least, the follow-on project, so to say, also sponsored by IMI, was the Paradigm project. Paradigm was created to jointly develop, patient and the different stakeholders develop different guidelines, recommendations, tools for the planning process, for the conducting the clinical trial, and also the reporting on how to make patient involvement most efficiently. That is all freely available on the website as well, and really very helpful when you are working in that area. So these are these guidances. On the US side, it was done differently.
Yeah, so in the US, we do have guidances as well that have come from the Food and Drug Administration. And these guidances, as well as other patient-focused drug development activities, sprouted out of what was signed into law, the FDA Reauthorization Act, as well as the 21st Century Cures Act, where we now have 4 guidances, 2 that are final guidances now in place, the first 2 of collecting comprehensive and representative input and methods to identify what's most important to patients. But we also have draft guidances that have received a lot of public comment and workshops across stakeholders. And these are to identify and develop methods to measure the impacts in clinical trials, and also methods, standards, and technologies to collect and analyze clinical outcome assessments for regulatory decision-making. And the key here is that this outlines how stakeholders can collect, analyze, and submit patient experience data. And it also outlines how the FDA separately is also involving patients themselves across all that they do. And if we go on to the next one.
Yeah. So while the IMI, the UPATI project, and also the FDA are talking and dealing with patient involvement in general, the different areas of indications, the patient communities there have taken that material and adapted it to their specific needs in their area of indication. So we have, for example, the Weekend Academy, which is an initiative of Weekend, so the collaboration of oncology patient organizations on a global basis, who have developed their own academy for teaching their patient community based on this groundwork that was translated in the specific needs of patient advocacy in their area of indication. And there are quite a lot of different other organizations who have also started to do that now. And all that together really shows that things are happening. When you see between 92 and practically 2017, 2018, there were here and there some additional activities, and that was balanced on both sides of the Atlantic. Things happened. But since 2020, we really see patient engagement activities and initiatives all over the place, everywhere, on a global basis. So things are really happening, and I'm not going to go into all these different initiatives. If you have time and you are interested, then please take a look and check what is of interest to you. But you can really see all the different areas where patient involvement makes sense everywhere in the world, and where people sit down and reflect and write down and recommend on how things could be done most efficiently, to make sure that ultimately we have the patient involvement practically as a routine element of our medicine's development process.
Thank you. And there is no legal mandate yet for patient involvement, but there certainly are expectations for patient involvement, just as you've seen in these guidances and as it's being done, and the key decision makers increasing their own patient involvement. So we know that the expectation is there from the patient communities. The expectation is there certainly from FDA and EMA. The harmonized principles that Ingrid showed before, in good publication practice guidelines, it's written in that, and we'll have a slide on that a little bit later, but that patients should be considered as authors and as well as reviewers in publications and on steering committees, especially in rare conditions. There we have guidance for lay summary practice guidances, again, that expect involvement of patients. I have an example from British Medical Journal and their expectations of authors, as well as from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute example of organizations who are providing research grants who have this as an expectation.
Interestingly, it is an important step from providing recommendations, guidances, and really living patient involvement. And in Europe, EMA has played here really a pioneering role. As those who are familiar with how EMA works, they have quite a number of different committees for different elements, aspects of the approval process and the life cycle process. And I'm not going to go into the details here. What I would like to convey here is that in all these committees, they have patient representatives who are sitting at the table, who, as a member of the team, not dictating what this committee has to come up with, but really as a voice at the table that helps with the decision-making, the joint decision-making process in these different committees. And this works very well in EMA when, to be honest, on the national level, in the national competent authorities, this is much less developed. There is a couple of years of delay before also the competent authorities on the national level accepted, understood the relevance and benefits of patient involvement and their ability then to really make that happen in practical life. But on the EMA, we have a lot of experience now and can benefit from the, let's say, this involvement of the patients. There are very strict rules for patients that want to participate in there. For example, they are not allowed to have any contact with industry whatsoever. Also in their CV. So it is definitely a very, very strict separation between, let's say, user perspectives and authority perspectives. But it's highly interesting also to see how many patients are absolutely willing to do that and really focus on this type of support.
So this is just the example from a funding institution, a funding organization. The PCORI is the leading funder in the United States of patient-centered comparative effectiveness research, and they will not fund proposals unless they include patients and they can demonstrate how they've involved patients, the community that they're researching early and throughout, as well as with plans of how to disseminate those study results. And by setting that as an expectation, that helps to ensure that patients are involved and meet the project's goals. And in the interest of time, I'll just, we can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And there also, British Medical Journal, this is the specific instruction to authors about public and patient involvement. And they've even said that there may come a time where they don't consider manuscripts for publication if there has not been community or patient involvement. And they've had reviewers who are patient reviewers since 2014 with success in that. If we go to the next.
Yeah, we have the similar situation in Europe. The European Commission funded projects, they all require patient engagement and the presentation on how this is going to be achieved, and also how the dissemination of the results to the patient community is going to work. So funding, public funding without patient engagement is also in Europe nowadays practically not possible anymore, which is really highly interesting to see. So academia is learning on that as well very quickly.
Yes, and good publication practices as well is now written in that patient authors, when we say, well, then how should they be listed? They should be listed as authors if they're authors, and the criteria are the same whether you're a patient or you're an academic. And there is encouragement within the guideline to have patients on as publication steering committee members. Next.
Okay, so in addition to the publication or lay summaries of or plain language summaries of publications, the European clinical trial regulation requires a presentation of all clinical trial results with drugs to the clinical trial information system in summary form, but also a so-called lay summary, meaning a presentation of the results of every clinical trial with drugs that has been started in lay language and lay understandable format for the public. And this was something that was introduced by the clinical trial regulation, but there was very little understanding of what would be required to make this process really work. And so there was a bottom-up initiative, in fact, a roadmap initiative to good lay summary practice, collaboration between FPR, so the industry association, and not-for-profit organizations to figure out together how that process should take place and should be organized, from planning to development to translation of lay summaries into as many languages as possible, and the dissemination process, and also how systematically to involve patients into these different phases of this process. This is within the European Utralex Volume 10, one of the guidelines that are required to be taken into consideration when organizing a clinical trial in Europe under the clinical trial regulation. This guideline is in Utralex Volume 10 now as well available.
So we finally get back to Mark's question, which is metrics and how do we know how we're doing? And I would direct everybody to take a look at the Patient-Focused Medicine Development Coalition and the metric selector tool that's on their website that includes more than 80 metrics that have been co-created and have had multiple stakeholders contributing to them, where you can look at the various stages of not only the development life cycle, but I think when you're choosing a metric, it depends on the maturity of the organization in their patient engagement. So if it's an organization that's just getting started engaging with patients, then one metric might be, are we engaging patients? How many patients are we engaging at which points in the life cycle? But really, that's just a base of a metric. Whereas if you're in a more mature phase, then you can look at things like, how many amendments did you expect in that clinical trial program based on history, and how many do you have now that we've been consistently engaging with patients? You can pick the metrics that will help you transform the aha that the teams notice when they engage with patients every single time into something that's demonstrable to the various stakeholders. And the amendment one I call attention to because that's one where, through the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, Bennett Levitan, Ken Getz, and others have published a financial model, an estimated net present value of engaging with patients early and often, and the impact in that model of if you avoid a certain number of amendments. And the value of that is tremendous. It's exponential compared to the investment in patient engagement financially. So again, if you're talking to your finance colleagues, that may be a metric that you're choosing to show, versus to the clinical operations colleagues, you may choose to talk about recruitment and retention and protocol deviation. So you have a way to select the metrics.
So after we have told you now all the things that have been developed, that have worked, that are moving on, we still need to be clear that we are on the road still. And there are quite a number of really important things to be done before we can say this is fully established, this is fully efficient, this is a process improvement that is really generating the benefits that we are expecting from this. So let's be clear, we have enabled a quantum leap in educated patient resources and self-sustaining infrastructure for further growth, but we need to further increase the number of educated patients worldwide. There is still a much bigger need of capacity need for involvement, for meaningful involvement of educated and knowledgeable patients. We need to develop this expertise in efficient patient engagement methodology for the different research questions and systematically educate all involved stakeholders, not only the patients, but also all involved stakeholder disciplines on how to optimize the benefit of patient advice, and also make sure that this is then communicated so that we learn from the experiences that the different stakeholders are making. What is clearly missing is an efficient matchmaking infrastructure between sponsors, academic industry sponsors, competent authorities, ethics committees, looking for patients, and patients who are willing and interested and looking themselves for opportunity to contribute. So we have no matchmaking infrastructure. We also need to work much more on the role of patient organizations to enable them to make better use of all the data that they are sitting on, so to say, in their patient community. Because one of the criticisms in all this patient involvement steps is that how representative is the opinion of 1 or 2 or 3 patients, and is that a solid enough basis for decision making for us in industry when we need to make a decision on a certain area of indication and outcome, etc. So the representativeness could certainly be much better supported if the data that are available, so to say, in patient organizations would be elaborated, investigated more sophisticatedly. And this is an area where especially academia and patient organizations could work very beneficially together to increase the knowledge about the situation in the different areas of indications. And we need to raise much more public awareness of the importance and benefits of patients' involvement in the development of new therapeutic options. We need still to ring the bell, make noise about that, and increase awareness to prepare the floor for all the activities that we are working on. So with this from my side, thank you very much. Danke.
Okay, many thanks to Ingrid and to Rose. A very comprehensive evaluation of this patient role that certainly will need continuous support and continuous strengthening the position. In the last minute, we have 2 additional questions that you may wish to answer. The first one is a very broad question. What is your view of the science report and this recommendation? The second question is more related to the fact, as we know, that today a large majority of patients in clinical trials come from low and middle income countries. Now, what is the situation about patient engagement in this part of the world that is, we know, the most populated part of the world, and is also the part of the world that is supporting clinical trials in a very large measure. So first Rosalind and then Ingrid.
So I'll be very brief about the science report. I am thrilled that patient involvement is included. So the more places we can have patient involvement written into guidances and reports, the more attention it will get and the better we'll get at doing it. As far as low and middle income country involvement, patient involvement, I think it's extremely important and difficult to do, more difficult than where you have more organized patient organizations that are more that are better funded, we'll say, where they have the time and the capabilities to be able to participate in all of the ways that we've outlined today. At the same time, it's no less important. So we have to make sure that we are specifically addressing those issues that are important where people live and where they will have the issues particularly related to access. We have to have those conversations in those regions with the people who are affected, and not just the industry having those conversations with the patient organizations, but building capabilities within those patient organizations to have the conversations with their governments, with the payers, to say these are things that are expectations from the community, and we need to all have those conversations in a way that works within the infrastructure that needs to improve. Ingrid.
Yeah, on the science guideline, I must say this these science guidelines have been created, I would say, by the most knowledgeable people in the fields currently. It is amazing when you look at the list of participants in that guideline. That's really the who is who in patient engagement, patient involvement of the last 10 years, I would say. So I think that is an excellent bundling of everything that has been experienced, the conclusions that have been drawn. So I like these guidelines very much, and therefore you have also seen them on this crowded slide with all the activities. There are the science guidelines. This is really, really a top document. I think that is extremely helpful. For the middle and low income countries and patient involvement, I agree. It is extremely important that we also understand how to do patient involvement there. However, we cannot expect that there is an infrastructure like in Europe or in the US that educates patients. I think here it is really the responsibility of the other educated group, the sponsors, the ethics committees over time, and the regulators to drive that process and to ensure that there is a steady growth of health literacy also in these countries, and in parallel an increased information about the issues and the pros and cons of the medicines development process. The interest in those countries is definitely the same, because these are patients like in all other parts of the world. They want to have better medicines that are made for themselves in their environment. So therefore the interest is certainly there, but the impetus must come from the sponsor side. I think that is the only possibility that we currently have.
Okay, many thanks to Roslyn and to Ingrid for this very detailed and informative discussion. I think also the interaction between the two speakers was very positive. Thank you to all participants for joining us today. We have another appointment before the summer holiday. Next month, we will discuss about new trial design in oncology. We know that 50% of clinical trials today are in oncology, and statisticians and also clinicians are developing new models to speed up development time, and also, most important in my view, to eliminate as soon as possible drug candidates that will not make it. So stay tuned with us, and I hope to meet with you in June for discussing the new frontiers of trial methodology in oncology. Again, thanks to Roslyn and Ingrid, and thanks to Keith that organized the logistic very efficiently. Bye-bye, and
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.